You don't notice it right away. Someone just fades. No announcement, no explanation, no dramatic exit. One day they're there and then suddenly they're gone. Quietly. Unnoticeably. Almost politely. And if you're honest, maybe you've done this too. You didn't mean to disappear. You just needed space. Or things felt heavier than you could explain. Or replying started to feel like a responsibility you never agreed to, so you postponed. Then postponed again. And eventually, enough time passed that coming back felt awkward. So you stayed gone. What's strange is how common this is, and how rarely we talk about it. Because disappearing without announcing it isn't always about being rude or flaky. It isn't always avoidance. And it's rarely as simple as not caring. Often, it's a quiet psychological strategy. A way the mind protects itself when words feel expensive, emotions feel tangled, or expectations feel too loud. Once you start noticing it, you see it everywhere. The friend who vanishes for months and then reappears like nothing happened. The coworker who slowly disengages without formally checking out. The romantic interest who fades instead of ending things directly. Or use stepping back, logging out, choosing silence over explanation. So what's really happening beneath the disappearance? Let's look at the different inner worlds that create this behavior, not to judge it, but to understand it. Because not everyone disappears for the same reason. And recognizing your pattern can quietly change how you relate to people, including yourself. Some people disappear because connection slowly turns into pressure. Picture someone on their couch, phone in hand, staring at a message they haven't replied to. It's not a difficult message, it's friendly, normal, maybe even kind. But replying feels like stepping onto a moving treadmill. Once you respond, you're back in the rhythm, back in expectations, back in being available. So they wait. They tell themselves they'll answer later when they have more energy or mental space. But later never feels right. Because the truth is, they're not avoiding the person, they're avoiding the ongoingness. For this type, relationships aren't light exchanges, they feel cumulative. Every reply is a small promise. Every interaction adds another invisible obligation. And when life gets overwhelming, work stress, emotional fatigue, internal chaos, those obligations feel heavy. So instead of explaining, they unplug. Silence becomes relief. Not because they don't care, but because caring feels like work they can't afford right now. If this resonates, you might notice a pattern. You show up deeply, then vanish completely. You're thoughtful when present, but inconsistent over time. Not flaky, just all or nothing. The disappearance isn't rejection. It's a reset. Then there's another type, quieter, more internal. This person disappears after thinking too much. They replay conversations, analyze tone, reread messages. Wonder if they said too much, or too little. Or something that sounded fine but might have landed wrong. Every interaction becomes data, and eventually engaging at all starts to feel risky. So the safest option becomes withdrawal. This type disappears when self-awareness turns into self-surveillance. They don't trust their social instincts. They don't feel grounded in how they're perceived. And instead of risking another moment that might be regretted, they quietly step back. Disappearing gives them control. No new mistakes. No new exposure. No new emotional variables. From the outside, this can look cold or detached. But inside, it's protective, almost tender. A way of saying, I don't know how to be seen right now without feeling raw. If this feels familiar, you might notice that disappearing often follows moments of vulnerability, after opening up, sharing something personal, or being unusually visible. Silence becomes a way to recover your emotional skin. Now let's talk about a type that often gets misread. This person doesn't disappear passively. They disappear deliberately. They don't announce their exit because they don't believe explanations are owed. They've learned that explaining invites negotiation, pushback, emotional labor. So instead of saying, this isn't working for me, they step away quietly. No scene. No argument. No chance for someone to talk them out of their decision. Their disappearance is an assertion of autonomy. They value internal clarity over external validation. They decide privately. And once they've decided, they act, without narrating their emotional process. To them, disappearing isn't avoidance. It's boundary setting without performance. If this is you, you may feel misunderstood when people call your silence immature. You're not afraid of confrontation, you're just uninterested in unnecessary dialogue. And yet, even you might occasionally wonder whether this quiet exit costs more than it saves. Because while disappearing protects your autonomy, it can quietly erode trust with people who need verbal closure. Then there's another profile, one that surprises people when they recognize it. This person disappears because they don't experience absence the same way others do. Time passes differently for them. Weeks go by without contact, and it doesn't feel like neglect. In their mind, the connection remains intact, unpaused. They assume it can resume naturally when convenient. So when they disappear, they don't feel like they're leaving. They feel like they're pausing. This type often reappears warmly, genuinely surprised if the other person felt abandoned. To them, nothing changed. They care deeply, but irregularly. If this resonates, you might struggle with guilt when you realize others don't experience distance the way you do. Your disappearance isn't intentional, it's perceptual. And finally, there's the most misunderstood type of all. This person disappears because explanation feels emotionally unsafe. Somewhere in their history, family, relationships, early environments, explaining themselves led to conflict, dismissal, or being talked out of their own experience. They learn that words don't create understanding. They create exposure. So silence feels safer. They don't disappear because they don't care. They disappear because words failed them before. For this type, disappearing isn't escape, it's self-preservation. Here's the important part. Most people aren't just one type. You might disappear one way with friends, another way at work, and another way in romantic relationships. Disappearing isn't a fixed trait, it's a response. A strategy your nervous system chooses when engagement feels more costly than distance. And disappearing works, at least short term. It reduces pressure, restores autonomy, creates breathing room, but over time, it teaches people how to relate to you. People learn not to rely on you, not to expect continuity, not to reach out as often. Not because you're wrong, but because silence communicates patterns. So the real question isn't whether disappearing is good or bad, it's whether it's conscious. Do you know why you disappear? Do you know what you're protecting? Do you know what it costs and what it gives you? Because once you see your pattern clearly, you gain another option. You don't have to announce everything. You don't have to over-explain. You don't have to stay when you're depleted. But you can choose how you disappear, more intentionally, more gently. More aligned with who you want to be, not just who you are in retreat. So sit with this. Which type felt uncomfortably familiar? Which one sounded like someone you know? And what might change if, instead of disappearing completely, you left a small signal behind? Not a justification. Not a long explanation. Just a quiet marker that says, I'm stepping back, and it means something. If this resonated, you're not alone. These patterns live in far more people than we admit. And noticing them is often the first step toward choosing presence or distance with more clarity and less confusion. If you want to explore more of these quiet psychological behaviors, the ones we rarely name but often live, stay with the channel. There's always more happening beneath the surface than we think.